In this video, you're going to learn how to work with arrays in JSX, and that's going to allow us to actually get the correct items rendered to the screen as opposed to the current static ones. Now, the good news is that JSX does support arrays by default. So we know that JSX supports strings. We know it supports numbers. We know it doesn't support objects, and we know that it just ignores Booleans, null, or undefined. But arrays, it works with, and it actually works with them really well. So to mess around with this, right here below the Remove All button, we're just going to make a few inline arrays, and we'll see how our application renders them. Then we're going to focus on pulling in the app options array and actually rendering the dynamic options right here in that ordered list. To get started, let's just open up a JavaScript expression, and for ease of viewing, I'm going to break this out onto its own line. For example, I could type a number or a string in here. That's exactly the same as keeping it on the same line. I'm just breaking this out so we can view our array a little bit easier. So right here, we're going to type a basic array. We can go ahead and put some stuff inside of there. And the things we put inside of there are the same sort of stuff we would put inside of a JavaScript expression. So strings, numbers, Booleans, undefined, and null. Once again, not using objects because objects aren't supported. So let's go ahead and start off with the most basic example possible. We're going to create an array with a few numbers. We'll have 99, 98, and 97. Now, numbers are supported by JSX, which means that we can also use them inside of an array. Let's take a peek at exactly what happens. When the application re-renders, right here we get our data. We get 99, 98, and 97 all showing up. When JSX sees an array, it renders each of the individual items side by side, which means that this code is equivalent to this code, where I break them out into their own expressions like this. Both of them are going to have the exact same effect, and this is actually what's happening behind the scenes. JSX is taking your array, it's breaking it out into the individual pieces, and it's getting all of them rendered to the screen. Now we know that numbers show up. We also know that strings show up. So if I were to type a string, Mike Smith, I would expect that to show up just like it would in a regular JavaScript expression, and it does indeed show up. Now, things like Booleans, null, and undefined, they don't show up, but they can still be used. So if I use null, undefined, and the Boolean true, none of these are going to show up. The rendered output is going to be exactly the same. And remember, this is what we saw before. If I dump undefined into a JavaScript expression, it has no impact on the rendered output. Now let's go ahead and take a quick peek at the elements panel and see exactly what we got when we render an array of things. Over here, we have our divs. Let's go ahead and crack those open. In there, we have our application, and down below, we have our data. So right here, you can see that once again, we have the various comments. We have our little React text nodes, and this is how React keeps track of the various items and where they're rendered inside of the DOM. That allows React to update an individual item if that changes, as opposed to needing to update everything contained inside of there. So this makes React really efficient when it comes to working with arrays. Now, we know one more thing about JSX. We know that we can actually render JSX inside of JSX. So right here, I could put a paragraph tag with a number 1, and that's going to show up to the screen. This is perfectly valid. Right there, we got our guy. So if we can render JSX in JSX, can we render an array of JSX in JSX? And the answer is yes. So most of the times, we're not going to have values like strings and numbers in an array that gets rendered. Instead, we're going to have an array of other JSX we want to render to the screen. For an example, later, we're going to have an array of various list items, and those are all going to get rendered. So let's go ahead and kick things off by adding a few paragraph tags. We're going to add one with a comma on the end, and then I'll take this and I will paste it a couple of times, adding 3 items total and removing that trailing comma. And then we're just going to go ahead and set up some numbers inside of there. We can actually just use letters. Let's use A, B, and C. With this in place, I'm going to go ahead and save app.js. And over here in the browser, we can see we now have 3 paragraph tags. We have A, we have B, and we have C. And if we dive into the divs, we can view those. They're all showing up. We got our P tags for all 3, and they're showing up side by side as if we created 3 separate expressions with all 3 pieces of information. Now you'll also notice that with this new example, with the JSX in our array, we're actually getting an error. When we're using JSX in arrays, you're going to see an error like this. Warning. Each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key prop. So as we saw when we had those text values inside of arrays, we had those comments that let JSX determine what to re-render. Well, with JSX inside of the array, it doesn't have those. So if we saw over here in the elements panel, there is no comments, there is no React text comments allowing JSX to figure out how it can re-render small parts of the application. So when it comes to arrays of JSX, all we have to do is tack on a key prop for each one, and that needs to be unique amongst the array. So the first one, for example, could just be the number 1. I could then set it up for the second example, key equals the number 2. And for the last example, key equals number 3. Now don't worry, in the future, this number is just going to be the ID for the given thing inside of a database, so we're not going to have to worry about manually typing these out. But for now, if we go ahead and save app.js, we can take a look at what happens when we do set key up. The first thing you're going to notice is that there is no warning in the console. We have successfully set up key, and if we go over to the elements panel, right here, we can see that everything still looks exactly the same. But by adding on that key identifier, we are allowing JSX behind the scenes to optimize the rendering process. It's going to be able to re-render the individual guys and keep track of where things are in the array. Now that we have this basic example of JSX in an array, we can focus on actually generating this from an array of things that aren't JSX. So what if we have an array of options, for example, which are strings? That's what we have right here. Now actually doing that is going to be your challenge, but together we're going to go ahead and create a new array that we can mess around with. Right here, let's make a const numbers, and we're just going to add some numbers in an array. Let's use 55, 101, and 1000. So we have these numbers, and our goal is to render a new paragraph tag for each, where inside of the paragraph tag, we actually use the number. How are we going to get that done? Well, we're actually going to use one of the array methods we already explored, map. We know that map lets us take an array and convert each item in some way, and we used that to double numbers, for example. I could iterate over this array, creating a new array where all the items are doubled. I could create a new array where I convert all the numbers to strings and add an exclamation mark on the end. Or I could create an array where I take the individual numbers and I return some JSX. The end result will be an array of JSX like this, and that's going to allow us to render things dynamically. So let's explore that. Right here, we can remove the static array, no longer necessary. We're going to be generating this dynamically based off of the numbers array above. Now, step 1 is to access numbers.map. And we know that map does take a function, so we will provide that function. And we also know that this function is going to get called with the individual items. In our case, it's an array of numbers. We can call the individual item a number. Now we return whenever we want to actually have show up. So whatever we return is going to be the new value for that item in the new array that's going to get rendered. That means if I return number times 2, what are we going to see over in the browser? We're going to see all of our numbers multiplied by 2. We have 110, we got 202, and 2,200. Excuse me, just 2,000. So what does that mean for us? It means we don't want to do this. What we want to return is JSX, for example, a p tag. That's going to create an array of p tags that are all going to render to the screen. And that's going to make it way easier to view our data. Now inside of the text for that paragraph tag, we could set up a label, number, colon, space, and then we can inject the value using a regular JavaScript expression right here, number. Then we can set up the key prop, making sure that React can optimize the rendering of our application. And we're going to set that equal to some unique value. For now, all of the numbers in here are unique, so we can just use the number itself. And there we go. That is all we need to do. We've taken an array of numbers, an array of some sort of data. We've converted it to an array of JSX, and we can now render that to the screen right here. We have 3 paragraph tags, 1 for each. Number 55, number 101, and number 1000. So we're going to be using this exact same technique right inside of here to iterate over app.options. Now, instead of numbers, we have strings, but the technique is going to be the same. We're going to use the individual string inside of the list item itself, like we use the number here, and we're going to be setting key equal to the string, like we set the key equal to the number here. Now, actually getting this done is going to be your challenge for the video. So right here, I will leave a little comment in JSX. When you want to comment in JSX, you just open and close a JavaScript expression and use regular comments. Then we can go ahead and outline what I'd like you to do. So you're going to map over app.options, getting back an array of list items, of LIs. Now don't forget to set the key prop, set key, and text for each. So the end result should be a set of list items where the text for each one is the options text. Now, by default, we're not going to see anything show up here because by default, we have an empty array. So when you're done and you're looking to test your work, you're going to want to make sure to submit that form a few times. That means by default, you're not going to see these guys. They're going to go away. Instead, you're going to have to add items in. To prevent any more confusing output, I am going to go ahead and comment out the example we just set up, although I will leave it in place so you can use it as a reference, and I'm also going to remove the numbers array. So it takes some time to knock this one out. There is no rush. Try to get all of those list items rendered to the screen. When you're done, go ahead and click play. How'd that one go? Hopefully you were able to use the map technique described above to get those items showing up. Right here, I'm going to kick things off by creating my JavaScript expression. If I'm going to add some code in there, I got to at least start there. Then I'm going to access the array we're trying to work with. That's app.options. From here, I'm trying to map over it. So app.options is an array of strings. That's not what I want to render because otherwise all the strings are going to show up side by side. Instead, I want each one to be in a list item so they show up in a nice numbered order. Right here, we're going to pass to map the function it expects. We are going to get our value. It's an array of options, so I can call the individual one an option. And all we're going to do is return a list item, a new JSX expression. I'm going to open and close it, and we're going to set up the correct things. So first up inside of here, we do want to dump the option text. Option is going to be the text value for the list item, and we're also going to set up the key prop, and we're going to set key equal to whatever the option happens to be, just like we did up above. Excellent. Now later on, we're actually going to be enforcing the ability to not add duplicates. Right now, you can add duplicates. If you do add the same item twice, you're going to get an error because the keys aren't unique. We'll worry about fixing that later. For now, we're just worried about the basics. With this in place, let's go ahead and save app.js and see what happens. The app is going to refresh by default. We have a length of 0 and our no options text is correctly showing up. Let's go ahead and add one in. First option. I hit enter, and now we see we have a length of 1, we have here are your options, and we have the first option showing up. If I add in a second one or an other guy, all of them are showing up correctly, and as I remove them all, they also go away. So there we have it. We have a really nice little setup where we are using arrays inside of our application. I'm going to go ahead and remove the comments for that challenge, and I'm also going to go ahead and remove this guy right here. No need to keep that example around because we have the exact same stuff illustrated down below. So let's take a quick moment to recap what we learned. In this one, we covered the fact that arrays are actually supported by JSX, just like numbers and strings are, which means that if we have an array of numbers or strings, they're all going to render side by side. We can also have an array of JSX inside of our JSX, and that is exactly what we end up creating here. That allows us to get into a situation where we render a dynamic number of elements based off of the array's length. Now in this situation, you might have also used the shorthand. For example, we are just returning some value. We can take this value, we can cut it out, we can remove the curly braces, and we can paste that value in. This has the exact same effect as we saw when we explored arrow functions previously. If I re-render the app and add some items in, there they are. I remove them and they go away. Excellent. That is it for this video. I will see you in the next one.